Hello. Is this working? Yes. Perfect. So I'm very happy to be here back in Stockholm for this OpenInfra Days. I know I'm competing with brownies and other things, so thank you for coming. OpenInfra Days are where we discuss open infrastructure, which is basically using open source solutions for providing infrastructure. And today, I wanted to talk to you about why. Why should you adopt open infrastructure today? Why should you use open infrastructure compared to closed infrastructure, which would be using proprietary software to provide infrastructure? And there are like a number of reasons for that. But I want to talk first about infrastructure and what do we mean by infrastructure? What do we mean by computing infrastructure and why do you need that? If you look at the history of computing, it's all about piling up new layers and abstractions. And that's done for two main reasons. The first one is market pressure, because when you have a company owning a certain layer, the way to displace the old king is to make that layer a commodity and build a new layer on top of that where differentiation and innovation is happening. That's, for example, the way the Microsoft Windows platform replaced the IBM PC platform in the 80s and 90s. And that's one main reason why we keep on piling those abstractions. The other reason is developer pressure, because they are looking for more convenience. And so one way to achieve that convenience is to abstract the differences between the lower layers by building a new layer on top that will mask the differences between the various implementations at the lower layers. That's, for example, using web browsers as an application platform to mask the differences between the various operating systems. So we've seen that piling up of layers and abstractions in all corners and directions in our industry, and especially in the infrastructure space. If you look at the way applications are provided, you would traditionally represent like this, with users on one side and applications on the other. But the way you deliver those applications has been evolving over the past 20 years. 20 years ago, you would procure some physical hardware, you would buy a server, and then as an application deployer, you would deploy your operating system, and then your dependencies, and then your application on top of that. But we started to add more and more layers. The first layer we added is obviously hardware virtualization, which is abstracting the server you're running your application on from the physical hardware that actually runs it. And then we added more layers. We added cloud APIs. It's basically providing programmable access to those virtualized resources. So you have programmable infrastructure on one side and cloud-native applications that are being deployed on top of that. Then more recently, we added a new layer, which is application deployment APIs, which is basically what Kubernetes provides. Higher-level abstractions that you can use to deploy complex applications on top of those virtualized resources. So we're seeing more and more of this infrastructure evolution. We're seeing evolution with developers and application deployers wanting to care less and less about infrastructure details. We're seeing a movement toward commodity hardware. Like once you reach a certain scale, rather than scaling up and buying a more specialized or larger or more powerful server, you would scale out by spreading the load across a number of simpler identical machines. We're seeing an evolution towards commoditization of the runtime environments. You would use disposable, easy to recreate runtime environments rather than care and feeding for very specific environments and make sure that it never dies. You would try to reuse easy to recreate environments that you can easily kill and recreate from scratch. We're also seeing a movement towards lighter and lighter runtimes. We're using bare metal machines. We're using VMs. We're using containers. We're now using functions. And this is clearly not an evolution that is over yet. So we are building more and more layers in the infrastructure space. And as we pile up those various layers, it's pretty clear that there is this new growing separate role of providing infrastructure for others to build and deploy applications on. And that is the population that we care about when we talk about open infrastructure. That is the group that we are trying to facilitate the work of by discussing open infrastructure here. So now that we set the stage and explain what is the population that we actually care about, why should you adopt open infrastructure? Why would you adopt that rather than use one of the many proprietary solutions that are out there? Well, there are a number of benefits. The first set of benefits are coming directly out of using open source. So they're easy to overlook. Open source is everywhere today, so it's easy to forget why it's actually a superior choice for a lot of cases. So the first benefit of using open source is availability. The fact that there is no barrier, contractually, monetary, or otherwise, to trying out the software with all of its functionality. The fact that you can easily experiment with the software, try it out, evaluate it, just have fun with it. The fact that there is no friction in transitioning from that experimentation to production. This is really a key benefit. But more important for a corporate case is sustainability. When an organization makes the choice of deploying software, it does not want to be left out in the cold without maintenance just because the vendor decided to change its mind or just disappears. With open source, the ability for anyone to take and modify the source code means that you're not relying on a single vendor for long-term maintenance of the solution that you decided to use. And it also conveniently avoids finding yourself locked in with the cost of switching software being too high and you being stuck in the wrong side of a business deal. So that's a really key reason why corporate businesses today are adopting open source. But another key business benefit is the fact that with open development methodologies, it makes it really easy for organizations to detect and attract talent. Like companies can easily find candidates based on the open record of their contributions to the technologies that they're interested in. Conversely, candidates can easily identify with the open source technologies that those companies are using. They can join those companies with the certainty that they will be able to capitalize on the software experience that will grow there. It's much better for them than working on proprietary software, which they are not even allowed to share, or they have no chance of encountering ever again. So you have better candidates, and it's more easy to attract them to your companies. From a technical standpoint, access to the source code means you're able to look under the hood and understand how the software works or why it behaves the way it does. It also gives you the opportunity to conduct independent security audits to find vulnerabilities on the code. But one step beyond that, the ability for anyone to take and modify the source code means that you're able to find and fix issues by yourself without even depending on a vendor, which can give you a critical edge when it comes to reacting to unexpected behavior or failures. And finally, with open source, you have the opportunity to engage in the community producing the software and influence its direction by contributing directly to it, which is a key reason, because organizations that engage in open development communities are more efficient, can anticipate changes, can voice concerns when a decision is made within the community that would adversely affect them. They can also make sure that the software will grow the features that they will need tomorrow by directly contributing to the software in that direction. So those are not abstract or philosophical benefits of why you should be using open source software. It's really key business reasons. And those are the main reasons why you should use open source today, and by extension, open infrastructure as well. But using open source technologies for providing infrastructure gives you 3 additional benefits, which we call the 3 C's: capabilities, compliance, and cost. So first, capabilities. So back in 2010, when we started OpenStack, there were a bunch of people claiming that there would be a standard cloud with standard-sized VMs, and that competing against Amazon Web Services in delivering that standard service was a losing battle. But now, 9 years later, what we are seeing is that clouds come in all forms and shape. We're seeing memory-optimized instances, we're seeing I/O-optimized instances, we're seeing GPU instances, we're seeing bare metal instances. Clearly, one size does not fit all. And some of those features are quite costly if you try to run them out of public clouds, because they are more difficult to run at scale with the same margins as your standard size VM. And some of the features are just not present. Like if you need a specific accelerator or piece of hardware in your servers, like if you want to have atomic clocks in your servers, like Google does, well, that's not an option in any public cloud. So using open infrastructure can give you the capabilities, the extensibility, the flexibility to build the exact infrastructure with the exact capabilities that you need. So that gives you an extra edge. The next one is compliance. It allows you full compliance with legal requirements. Obviously, that's big in Europe because we have very strong data privacy laws, and those drive data locality concerns. But we're seeing that for governments everywhere. Like that data locality concern is really critical for foreign governments for governments that are subject to foreign espionage. And that concern transfers to strategic companies like Airbus, who might be subject to the same kind of foreign espionage. We're also seeing more and more concerns from companies that are directly competing with the big public cloud providers that are not necessarily comfortable running their workloads on that company hardware. So like, for example, Netflix competing with Amazon Video while running their whole infrastructure on AWS. And finally, there is cost. If, as an infrastructure provider, you're looking for providing private infrastructure, which is for the needs of your internal organization, there are a number of proprietary solutions that you can pick, but the per-seat licensing costs add up really, really quickly. So open infrastructure can give you a better handle on controlling that cost, especially if you want to grow to a large footprint. At the same time, if you're a company interested in providing public infrastructure, which is providing infrastructure for anyone around the world with a credit card, there is just no proprietary software that you can use directly. So you could write your own, and a lot of people do. You would probably get to something really working well, really fast. After all, OpenStack Nova was prototyped in a weekend of coding, so that's totally doable to write code to do this stuff. But the devil is in the details, in the corner cases, in the bug fixes. I mean, there is a reason why 9 years in, we're still seeing 1,300 changes in OpenStack Nova over the past 6 months of development in the train cycle. Relying on a community that will share the same code will save you massive amounts in development costs and maintenance costs over the long run. So those 3 C's are like yet another reason to choose open infrastructure today. But now I want to talk to you about another reason, which is that open infrastructure enables interoperability and hybrid cloud scenarios. So as a quick digression, why should we care? Like hybrid clouds, is it like an industry buzzword, not very interesting? Well, if you look at how you traditionally choose between private clouds or public clouds, the cost analysis looks a bit like this. If you look at the cost per CPU compared to the number of CPU cores that you're running, public clouds looks a bit like this, with like you pay a certain price per CPU up to a point where you hit a new pricing tier and it goes down a bit, and then flat again until you hit a new pricing tier, and at some point you hit the highest pricing tier and it just goes flat. The cost profile for private clouds, on the other hand, looks a bit like this, like the high investment at the start, and then you hit economies of scale up to the point of diminishing returns at the end. So on paper like this, the choice between public and private looks really simple. If you're above a certain number of CPU cores, then private infrastructure makes more sense. Whereas if you're under that, you should probably use public infrastructure. But that's very oversimplifying the question, because it assumes that the number of cores that you're running over time is constant. And in reality, any real-world workloads look more like this. You have peaks and dives in usage. And what makes the most sense economically is to use private infrastructure for the resources that you're always running, and use public infrastructure to absorb the spikes in usage. That's what makes actually the most sense if you don't want to run servers that do nothing, like Christoph was presenting earlier. So that's what is called hybrid usage. And open infrastructure enables those hybrid usage scenarios, because using the same software on the private and the public side of your infrastructure brings you extra benefits. It allows you to optimize cost, because you will be able to run, for those workloads that you always have to run, you will use private infrastructure for having a better cost per CPU ratio, while still being able to use the elasticity of the public cloud as a solution. It enables capabilities and compliance, because you can run those sensitive workloads or those specific capabilities in the private side of your infrastructure if you have them, while still using public infrastructure for absorbing the rest. And finally, it allows you to control applications cost, because having the same code and APIs on both sides means you don't have to develop separate versions and validate separate versions of your code based on where they end up running. So it's easy to move workloads from the private side of your infrastructure to the public side and vice versa. Examples of this interoperability in open infrastructure includes Kubernetes, obviously promising interoperability at the application deployment level for all the cloud infrastructure that provides it as a solution. And OpenStack, which promises interoperability at the infrastructure as a service layer. And you have OpenStack public clouds and OpenStack private clouds that can be used with the same APIs and same code. So open infrastructure is pretty awesome. Like, it really makes sense for today. But the best thing is that it also makes sense for tomorrow, because open infrastructure is future-proof. So what do I mean by that? Well, obviously, it's difficult to know what the future holds, but we're pretty sure of a few things. We know that abstractions will continue to be piled. There's just no reason to think that we'll stop there. We've gone from virtualization to cloud APIs to cloud deployment APIs. This is clearly not over. We're also pretty sure that there is no miracle technology that will end all technologies. We're still using bare metal machines. We're still using virtual machines. We're using containers. We start to use functions. Those are not necessarily exactly the same thing. There is no miracle technology that will replace everything. And there is no reason to think that containers are somehow the end of all innovation in that space. New things will be invented tomorrow, and those things will require infrastructure. We're also pretty sure of that. The infrastructure will always have to be provided. Applications will always have to be deployed somewhere. I mean, even serverless needs servers. So we're pretty sure of that. And in that uncertain future, open infrastructure helps. Because with open source, you're not investing in a specific product. You're investing in a community. It allows you to invest in a community that will tackle a problem space rather than produce a specific product. And as an example, at the OpenStack Foundation, we're taking the perspective of the infrastructure provider, and we're trying to help them build and run open infrastructure. And that's not just about producing OpenStack or producing a specific software stack. It's about solving a problem that people have. And that technology that you will use to that effect can evolve over time. OK, so to summarize, we've seen several reasons why it makes sense to use open infrastructure today. Some of them are rooted in the choice of open source software. We've seen the 3 Cs, cost, compliance, and capabilities. We've seen that it enables interoperability, that it enables hybrid cloud usage. We've seen that it better prepares you for whatever is to come next, and we don't know what that is. But there is a deeper reason why you should use open infrastructure, and that is that it enables innovation. I love open infrastructure because I don't want a world where all of the infrastructure needs are provided by a couple of internet giants, or worse, by a monopoly. Why? Well, because monopolies are bad. Monopolies distort good market conditions and end up preventing innovation in the end. So it's not really sane. But what's even less sane to me is, and even borderline dangerous to me, is monocultures. Monocultures are vulnerable. If half of the internet is running off a single internet big shop, well, that's not resilient at all. And what used to be mildly annoying, like it's not working today, with more and more devices being connected to the internet and needing the internet to function correctly, what used to be mildly annoying can now become life-threatening. And this is very important that we have diversity in that space. It's important that we avoid monopolies and monocultures. But beyond that, open infrastructure, the fact that you give everyone access to infrastructure providing technologies is enabling everyone to play and innovate. If you restrict innovation to a couple of big shops, you're limiting what the world can do. And that, to me, is the last but not the least reason why you should use open infrastructure today. Thank you.